Hey everyone, can you hear us? Okay, works? Perfect. So Tom already introduced us. That was half the presentation. We are basically done. I will so we plan to present the Polkadot SDK tooling landscape, which is pretty big at this stage. So we are not going to present everything, just give a rough overview of what exists at the moment and give a few examples. I also, if you have been sitting here all day, you probably already saw the presentation about the treasury funding grants and so on. I will also quickly touch on it, simply because it's related. But not go into so much details. And afterwards, we present a few random examples that we basically like. But there are so many more projects. If you're interested in one specific project, check out GitHub or whatever. Look at YouTube. There are a lot of. But you could hear me, so no one complained. Perfect. All right. If you take one thing away from this talk, it's probably this website. So we keep track, or maybe to give you some background, initially with grants. When people applied for grants, we had to have a way to keep track of what exists in the ecosystem, what is already created, on what people are working on, and basically to see is it necessary to fund a certain project or not. So we created a public open source list that is accessible for everyone to see what projects exist in our ecosystem. At this point, we moved the entire list to the wiki to even make it easier for external people to contribute, but it's basically an awesome list, if you're familiar with this, that keeps track of every open source software that exists in our ecosystem and also shows immediately if it's maintained or not, at least on the main branch. So you can immediately get an overview what exists, what is out there, is it maintained, is it not maintained, and what are potentially gaps that exist in our ecosystem. So that's where we keep track of it as part of the grants program, but also invite everyone else here to contribute to it. And also everyone who hasn't seen this already and might take a look at it, and you see, I don't know, we see validator companies here, they see a potential tool is missing or anybody else, a parachain team, and they are looking at it and see that something is missing. Either let us know via the RFP process, and we try to find a team that potentially works on this specific open source software, or simply start working on it yourself, and we are willing to support you. And yeah, just to say it again and to stress this point, everyone is more than welcome to contribute to this list, and to make the transition also to the next slide, it basically shows that our ecosystem right now is unstoppable. It shows all the contributions that are being made as open source code, and that ultimately, as Rob Habermeyer yesterday said, if we work together, we can create this unstoppable ecosystem, and this is what we try to do. So as you can see also from the Electric Capital report, Polkadot is at the moment one of the fastest growing ecosystems, and sharing and helping each other with open source software is usually, or is the biggest part of it. Why exists so much open source software in our ecosystem compared to also others? It's certainly because there are so many funding opportunities. And we basically made it pretty clear from the beginning that we want to be as transparent as possible. and that we specifically focus on open source software in our ecosystem. So we are not supporting with grants, for example, closed source software. Everything needs to be shared. The same is true for a lot of other grants programs in our ecosystem that used the grants program itself, which is fully open source and transparent. You can basically fork our grants program if you want to create your own grants program, and use this as a template to create your own grants program. So I think the community of sharing and benefiting from each other is very big in our ecosystem, and yeah, we only can all benefit from it. Besides the various different grant programs that are also listed as part of our program, there are the on-chain treasuries, there are various bounties that have been mentioned before here, and there are other programs like the Substrate Builders program. So I don't want to go into the details here again. Now we want to present you just a few examples that I, or Bhargav and I both find interesting, but there are tons of others. And feel free to also, if you later want to ask questions, feel free to ask about other projects in the ecosystem and other interesting things. So one thing I personally find interesting, because I was a C# developer before I actually joined the entire blockchain space, is the Substrate.net toolchain. And if anyone from you is familiar with Unity, the game engine that is usually used by a lot of indie developers to create their own games, basically, which is also fully based on C#, then this is basically a great combination. I know that there's currently some controversy around Unity and their pricing model and so on, but still it's a great way to, if you want to create a game and you want to combine this with a blockchain, this is a great combination. And it's to also mention this here, it's not a project anymore that is maintained by a single team in our ecosystem, but actually multiple teams came together and both maintain this toolchain. And it's more than just a simple client or API. It's a framework that supports multiple standards. It has additional tools to deal with a lot of transactions, to improve the performance and so on. So it's quite useful. And if you want to develop on a game together with a blockchain, I highly recommend it. Then one other project I like to mention, which probably none of you have heard of. I think my ears are strange or something like this. Drop, but can you still hear me? Yeah. Better. All right. Yeah. So one other project is this monitoring SDK. We actually supported it yesterday with another grant, and it allows you to actually monitor assets that are released on the Asset Hub between different parachains, also the cross-chain messages transfers. It lets you easily integrate with light clients, and is overall a great tool to actually make it easy for custodians and exchanges to leverage the Asset Hub in the future, and to actually integrate these different varied assets in a trustless way into whatever they want to provide. And this, together with the Asset Hub and additional tools that are at this stage available, is a great way for Polkadot to actually continue to grow and to leverage this benefit of the common good infrastructure that we also have at this stage, and system chains that are so far not used to their full extent, but there are additional tools under development. And just to mention it, there's a huge benefit of this. And we actually had during Sub0 now conversations with wallet providers to actually add additional features on top. And with this said, I'll let Bhargav continue.
Thanks, David. Just to continue the chain of thoughts that David already started, I will be giving an overview of some of the tooling in Substrate ecosystem, specifically focused on like the testing and security front. To start with, we have this tool called Chopsticks. It was developed by Akala and is very actively maintained. It's basically a tool that lets you locally test your runtimes on the latest state of the chain. So what you can do is like fork existing substrate-based chains like Polkadot or Kusama, and you can like replay the blocks and see the effect of your runtime on the latest state. So this really lets you test your runtime upgrades, for example, on the latest state, so that you are 100% sure that your the local state that you set up, you don't have to just trust the local state that you set up, but you can directly test it on the latest chain state as well, right? And it also lets you like fork multiple parachains, and this is also a great way for you, in a sense, to see if like the XCM messages are delivered or not, because you can like fork multiple parachains and see if basically write like tests for seeing if the XCM messages have been delivered or not. So, and here is like the QR code for the GitHub repo. So if you are curious and want to like really test your runtimes, then this is something that you should definitely check out. The other tool that I want to talk about is Zombinet. It's been developed and maintained by Parity. It's basically an integration testing tool, right? So we know testing blockchain systems are really hard. So it's of paramount importance that we have such tools so that we can like locally spawn a network and see, and even for things like logging, it's really important to have these like local test nets spawned. So it's like a very cool tool. It's like a CLI tool, and it lets you like spawn these ephemeral or temporary substrate networks. And they're also trying to add features where you can like dynamically define your network configurations. So for example, if you want to simulate network latency, this is something that is underway in the Zombinet tool. And how do you like write tests, right? So for writing tests, Zombinet already provides you like a DSL. It calls it ZN DSL, like Zombinet DSL. It's a domain-specific language very close to a natural language, and you can come up with like tests or like assertions based on the logs that the network is generating, or things like some kind of like metrics. And you can also write your own like built-in test harnesses and basically run it locally in your local network. Another interesting feature is that it has like neat integrations with like Kubernetes clusters and Podman, and you can also like visualize these tests using like Grafana. So for example, you can with these integrations, you can spawn your network on. I mean, you'd have to provide the infrastructure for the K8 clusters, but the integration with the Zombinet tool is pretty smooth. Right? And the other tool that I want to, so these are like mostly like testing tools. And now I want to talk a bit more about like security-focused tooling. For that, this is a tool by SR Labs. It was open sourced very recently, like 2 months ago. And this is a tool that has been heavily battle tested for finding vulnerabilities in like runtime palettes. So what is it? It's basically a fuzzing tool. for detecting vulnerabilities. By default, you can like detect panics and timeouts or like runtime crashes with it. But of course, you can also write your own custom fuzz harnesses, right? So you can set up the state. You can use the fuzzed input for fuzzing the state itself, and then also fuzz the inputs for your extrinsics, and then see if there are like some panics that are happening in the runtime, or yeah. So basically, like panics is the oracle on which you are basing your first tests on. So the way this tool works is it uses another tool by SR Labs called Ziggy in the background. So Ziggy is basically an amalgamation or a layer on top of other core fuzzing engines. So you have like coverage-guided fuzzing engines like AFL, like it's an abbreviation for American Fuzzy Loop, HonkFuzz, which is a fuzzer developed by Google, and LibFuzz. So all these fuzzers kind of do the coverage-guided fuzzing at the LLVM layer, but they all have like rushed interfaces. And what Ziggy does is that if you didn't have Ziggy, then you would have to like literally write a fuzz harness for each of these different tools. But with Ziggy, you can write one fuzz harness, and it automatically calls all these backend fuzzing engines on your behalf. Right? And it also lets you write structure-aware fuzzing. So for example, if you have an extrinsic with a few parameters, and if you already know what the structure of these parameters is going to be, for example, if you know that like the account balances is of type U32 or something, then what you can do is you can just write an arbitrary trait implementation for your struct, and then derive basically like a distribution over all possible inputs. And the fuzzer uses this like distribution for its like input space in coming up with interesting and relevant inputs that are going to have as much depth as possible in basically the call graph. So that was kind of like an overview of the security and testing tools that are there. But there are a lot more which you can check out in the wiki. Last but not the least, we want you to contribute. So this is basically a link to our RFP page in the Web3 grants program. And RFC, for those of you who don't know, stands for like request for proposals. And we want this to be like a portal where people can exchange ideas on what kind of toolings that they require in the ecosystem. So for example, if you have a really interesting requirement, that is, you have a pain point and you feel that a tool can be easily developed for this, then I would encourage you to kind of submit that as an RFP through this grants program portal. You don't have to be very clear in writing down your RFP. You can just write a very basic, simple draft, and someone from the grants program can help you refine this RFP such that it's follows our format and helps like other developers who are looking for inspiration to write tools can get some ideas from these RFPs. So that was the other point I was going to make, is that it's also for developers who have ideas for tool, but it's the same portal also works for developers who are new in the ecosystem and they're not sure what exactly to build, or are just like dabbling with all different components in Substrate and want to get some inspiration on what are like the real requirements and pain points which they want to address. So with that, I would like conclude, and we are open for like questions if you have any.
stick your hand up and I'll bring you the mic.
If there are no questions, just a reminder, please contribute. we don't like to work. Please tell us what is existing or what is missing in our ecosystem. Feel free to open PRs. If you want to work on something yourself, feel free to submit applications. If you look at the open source stack that I shared at the beginning and you see a project might be interesting for you, but it's no longer maintained, feel free to apply for a grant or a treasury proposal to continue to maintain it. There are a lot of resources in our ecosystem to support this kind of work. And to make Polkadot truly unstoppable. Yeah.
Perfect. Yeah. David and Bhargav, guys, thank you very much.